Lioness and lion plead for help from human. After baby falls into crocodile-infested river, the African sun hung low on the horizon, painting the savanna in shades of amber and gold. Dr. James Mitchell had spent the better part of 15 years working as a wildlife conservationist in the Zambezi Delta. But nothing in his extensive experience could have prepared him for what was about to unfold on that sweltering October afternoon. James had been conducting his routine patrol along the Ruvuma River, a winding waterway that served as a lifeline for countless species in the region. The river was beautiful but treacherous, known locally as one of the most dangerous bodies of water in all of East Africa. Beneath its murky surface lurked some of the largest Nile crocodiles on the continent, prehistoric predators that had remained virtually unchanged for millions of years. These apex predators could grow up to 18 feet long and weigh over a ton, with jaws capable of exerting pressure exceeding 3,000 pounds per square inch. As James navigated his dusty Land Rover along the rutted track that paralleled the river, he noticed something unusual in the distance. The late afternoon light created strange shadows across the landscape, but there was definitely movement near the water's edge. He slowed the vehicle and reached for his binoculars, bringing the scene into sharp focus. What he saw made his heart skip a beat. 2 adult lions, a magnificent male with a dark flowing mane and a lean, powerful lioness, stood at the river's edge in postures he had never witnessed before. They weren't hunting. They weren't drinking. Instead, they appeared to be pacing frantically along the muddy bank, their heads lowered toward the water, emitting sounds that even from this distance seemed desperate and anguished. The male would occasionally rear up on his hind legs, pawing at the air in what looked like genuine distress. The lioness was making short, abortive attempts to enter the water, only to leap back onto the bank as if repelled by some invisible force. James's pulse quickened. In all his years observing lion behavior, he had never seen anything quite like this. Lions were confident, apex predators, masters of their domain. This display of apparent helplessness was completely out of character. Something was terribly wrong. He drove closer, carefully, knowing that approaching wild lions required extreme caution regardless of the circumstances. As he drew nearer, the reason for their distress became horrifyingly clear. There, in the middle of the river, clinging desperately to a partially submerged log, was a lion cub that couldn't have been more than 3 months old. The tiny creature was soaked, its fur plastered to its small body, making it appear even more vulnerable than it already was. Its mouth was open in what James could only imagine were cries for help, though the sound was lost beneath the rushing water and the anxious vocalizations of the adult lions on the shore. But the cub's predicament was even more dire than it first appeared. James's trained eye quickly identified several dark shapes moving through the water with unmistakable intent. Crocodiles, at least 4 of them, possibly more, were circling the log like submarines stalking their prey. The reptiles moved with that characteristic stillness that made them so effective as ambush predators, only their eyes and the ridges of their backs visible above the water's surface. They were being patient, calculating, waiting for the right moment to strike. The adult lions had clearly seen the crocodiles too. This explained their desperate behavior. They understood the danger their offspring was in, but they also knew that entering the water would mean certain death. Lions, despite their fearsome reputation on land, are vulnerable in water, especially water inhabited by Nile crocodiles. A single croc could drag down a full-grown lion and execute its infamous death roll, drowning the big cat within minutes. The parents were trapped in an impossible situation, their every instinct screaming at them to save their baby, but their survival instincts holding them back from what would be a suicidal rescue attempt. James felt a wave of emotion wash over him. This wasn't just about observing nature anymore. This was a family in crisis, a baby in mortal danger, and parents who were powerless to help. The conservationist in him knew that nature must take its course. That intervention could disrupt the delicate balance of the ecosystem. Crocodiles needed to eat too. They were just as much a part of this environment as the lions. But the human in him, the father who had a young daughter of his own back in London, couldn't simply stand by and watch a baby die while its parents pleaded for help. It was then that something extraordinary happened. The male lion turned and looked directly at James. Their eyes met across the distance, and in that moment James felt a connection that transcended species. The lion didn't show aggression or fear. Instead, there was something else in that golden gaze, something that looked remarkably like a plea. The lioness, too, had noticed his presence and was now facing him, her body language suggesting not threat but supplication. James had read countless studies on animal cognition and behavior. He knew that lions were intelligent, that they could problem solve and even cooperate with other species when circumstances demanded it. But this seemed to go beyond anything documented in the scientific literature. These parents, in their desperation, appeared to be asking him for help. They seemed to understand that he represented their cubs' only chance for survival. The decision crystallized in James's mind in an instant. He would act. The ethical implications could be sorted out later. Right now, a baby needed help, and he was the only one who could provide it. He quickly assessed the situation. The log the cub was clinging to was approximately 40 feet from the shore, in water that was probably 6 to 7 feet deep based on the current and the geography of this section of the river. The crocodiles were circling but hadn't yet committed to an attack, likely because the cub was on top of the log rather than in the water itself. But that wouldn't last. Either the cub would tire and slip into the water, or one of the boulder crocs would launch itself partially out of the water to snatch the baby from its precarious perch. James had rope in the back of his vehicle, standard equipment for any bush expedition. He also had his rifle loaded with tranquilizer darts, though he knew that drugging a crocodile was notoriously difficult and unreliable. Their nervous systems were different from mammals, and the dosage was tricky to calculate. A tranquilized crocodile might simply sink to the bottom of the river, or worse, become more aggressive before the sedative took effect. The rifle also had live rounds, but killing the crocodiles wasn't an option he wanted to consider, unless absolutely necessary. They were protected species too, and he hadn't come to Africa to wage war against wildlife. He grabbed the rope and quickly fashioned a loop at one end, creating a makeshift lasso. The plan forming in his mind was desperate and dangerous, but it was the only option he could see. He would wade into the water as far as he dared, try to lasso the log and pull it and the cub to shore. The crocodiles would certainly react to his presence, but he was hoping that his size and upright posture might give them pause. Nile crocodiles typically hunted prey at the water's edge, animals that bent down to drink and presented their heads and necks as easy targets. A 6-foot-tall human standing upright in the water was outside their normal hunting parameters, at least initially. As James began walking toward the water's edge, the adult lions reacted immediately. The male stepped back, creating space, while the lioness moved to the side, her eyes fixed on him with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. They were watching his every move, and their body language suggested they understood his intent. There was no aggression, no territorial display. If James hadn't known better, he would have sworn they were encouraging him. He paused at the water's edge and looked down. The water was the color of weak tea, stained by tannins from vegetation upstream. Visibility was near zero, which meant he wouldn't be able to see a crocodile until it was directly upon him. His hands were trembling slightly as he gripped the rope. Fear was a natural response, and he acknowledged it. Being afraid in this situation meant his survival instincts were working properly. If you're watching this and your heart is racing like mine was in that moment, please take a second to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. Share this story with others who care about wildlife and the incredible bonds that can form between species. Your support helps us continue documenting these amazing encounters and supporting conservation efforts worldwide. James took his first step into the water. The river was warmer than he expected, heated by the intense African sun. He moved slowly, deliberately, keeping his movements smooth and non-threatening. Sudden splashing would trigger the crocodile's predatory instincts. He needed to move like he belonged here, like he was just another river creature going about his business. The cub had noticed him now and was crying out more frantically. The little one's voice was high-pitched and desperate, a sound that tugged at James's heart and made him move a bit faster despite his better judgment. Behind him on the shore, the lioness was pacing parallel to his movement, staying as close as she could without entering the water herself. The water was up to his knees now, then his thighs. Each step was carefully placed, his feet searching for solid footing on the river bottom. The current was stronger than it looked from shore, pushing against his legs with surprising force. James kept his eyes on the crocodiles. They had definitely noticed him. The nearest one, a massive male that had to be at least 15 feet long, had altered its course and was now moving in his direction with slow, deliberate strokes of its powerful tail. James's mouth went dry. Every fiber of his being was screaming at him to turn around and get out of the water. This was insane. He was voluntarily putting himself in the kill zone of one of nature's most efficient predators. But when he glanced at the cub, now only about 20 feet away, still clinging to that log with its tiny claws, he knew he couldn't turn back. The water was chest deep now. James began paying out the rope, preparing to make his throw. He would only get one chance at this. If he missed, the time it would take to retrieve the rope and try again might be time the cub didn't have. He steadied his breathing, focused on the target, and threw. The loop sailed through the air and landed perfectly, encircling the thicker end of the log. James couldn't believe his luck. He quickly pulled the rope tight, securing it around the log. The cub, feeling the sudden movement, cried out even louder and tried to climb higher onto the log, which began to rotate in the water. That's when the nearest crocodile struck. It happened with shocking speed. One moment the massive reptile was 10 feet away, the next it had exploded from beneath the surface, its jaws gaping open to reveal rows of conical teeth. James threw himself backward, yanking hard on the rope as he did so. The crocodile's jaws snapped shut on empty water inches from where the cub had been a split second before. The force of James's pull had moved the log just enough to save the baby's life. But now James was off balance, stumbling backward in chest-deep water with a furious crocodile between him and the shore. The reptile's tail thrashed the surface into foam as it turned to face him. James could see the cold, calculating intelligence in those prehistoric eyes. The crocodile was assessing him, trying to determine if he was prey or threat. James knew that running would trigger a pursuit response. Instead, he stood his ground, making himself as large as possible, and let out the loudest, deepest roar he could manage. It was a ridiculous sound, a human attempting to intimidate a creature that had survived since the age of dinosaurs, but sometimes bluffing was all you had. To his amazement, the crocodile hesitated. Perhaps it was confused by this strange, upright creature that didn't behave like normal prey. Perhaps it was the noise. For whatever reason, it didn't press its attack. Instead, it slowly sank beneath the surface, disappearing into the murky water. James didn't waste the opportunity. He began backing toward shore as quickly as he dared, pulling the rope hand over hand, dragging the log and its precious cargo with him. The cub was still crying, a constant, high-pitched wail that carried across the water. The other crocodiles were moving in now, having overcome their initial caution. James could see their wakes converging on his position. The lioness on shore had become even more agitated, running back and forth along the bank, clearly desperate to help but still unable to overcome her instinctive fear of the water and the crocodiles. The male lion had moved closer to the water's edge, his muscles tensed, ready to act if needed. James's feet found purchase on the gradually rising river bottom. The water level dropped from his chest to his waist to his thighs. He was moving faster now, pulling harder on the rope. The log was getting closer to shore, scraping along the bottom in the shallower water. The cub, sensing safety was near, had stopped crying and was now watching James with wide, frightened eyes. 15 feet from shore. 10 feet. James could see another crocodile approaching fast from his left, moving through water so shallow that its entire back was exposed. It was now or never. James gave one final mighty heave on the rope, pulling the log up onto the muddy bank. The cub, startled by the sudden movement, lost its grip and tumbled off into the shallow water right at the edge. That's when the lioness made her move. With a roar that seemed to shake the very air, the mother lion charged into the shallow water without hesitation. All her previous fear was gone, replaced by pure maternal instinct. She grabbed her cub by the scruff of its neck with her powerful jaws and bounded back onto dry land in a single fluid motion, just as the nearest crocodile lunged into the space she had occupied a moment before. James scrambled out of the water and collapsed onto the bank, his heart hammering in his chest, his lungs burning from exertion and adrenaline. He had done it. The cub was safe. For a moment, there was absolute silence except for James's heavy breathing and the gentle lapping of water against the shore. The crocodiles had retreated back into deeper water, denied their meal. The cub was on the ground, coughing up water and shaking, but alive. The lioness was sniffing her baby all over, checking for injuries, while making small, comforting sounds deep in her throat. Then the male lion did something that James would remember for the rest of his life. The massive cat walked slowly toward him. James's survival instincts kicked in again and he tensed, knowing he had no chance if the lion decided to attack. He was exhausted, soaking wet, and unarmed except for the rifle still in his vehicle. But the lion's body language showed no aggression. He approached to within 10 feet of where James sat, close enough that James could see every detail of his scarred muzzle and hear his deep, rumbling breaths. The lion stopped and looked directly into James's eyes. For a long moment, they simply regarded each other. Then, in a gesture that seemed almost unbelievable, the great cat lowered his head in what could only be described as a bow. He held the position for several seconds before raising his head again, giving James one last long look, and then turning to walk back to his family. The lioness had picked up the cub again and was carrying it away from the river toward the safety of higher ground. The male fell into step beside her, occasionally glancing back at James. As a family, they walked away into the golden savanna, the cub dangling from its mother's jaws, exhausted but safe. James sat there on the muddy riverbank for a long time after they disappeared from view, trying to process what had just happened. He had been a wildlife conservationist for 15 years, had dedicated his life to studying and protecting African wildlife, but nothing had prepared him for this level of interspecies communication and cooperation. Those lions had asked him for help as clearly as if they had spoken English. They had trusted him, a member of a species that had hunted them to the brink of extinction in many parts of Africa, to save their baby. And that final gesture from the male, that bow, had been an acknowledgement, a thank you, as the sun finally dipped below the horizon. Painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, James made his way back to his Land Rover. His clothes were soaked and muddy, he was covered in scratches from scrambling along the rocky riverbank, and he knew his colleagues back at the research station would think he'd lost his mind when he told them this story. But he didn't care. He had witnessed something profound, something that spoke to the possibility of connection between all living beings. In that moment when the male lion had looked into his eyes, James had felt the barriers between species dissolve. They weren't predator and prey, human and animal. They were simply two fathers, two beings who understood the imperative to protect the young, to ensure the next generation survived. The following days brought a flurry of activity. James reported the incident to his supervisors at the conservation organization, carefully documenting everything that had occurred. He returned to the site multiple times, hoping to catch another glimpse of the lion family, but they had moved on to safer territory away from the river. He did find their tracks, though, evidence that all three were traveling together. The cub's tiny paw prints between the larger ones of its parents. The story began to spread through the conservation community. Other researchers came forward with similar accounts of animals seemingly asking humans for help in desperate situations. There was a growing body of evidence suggesting that wildlife, particularly intelligent species like lions, elephants, and primates, could recognize humans as potential allies rather than just threats or prey. It was a paradigm shift in how we understood interspecies relationships. James began giving talks about the experience, using it as a platform to discuss the importance of conservation efforts and the complex emotional and cognitive lives of the animals we share the planet with. Every time he told the story, he remembered that moment of connection with the male lion, that sense of mutual understanding that transcended language and species. The implications were profound. If animals could recognize us as potential helpers, if they could seek us out in times of crisis and trust us to act in their interests, then we had a greater responsibility than ever to be worthy of that trust. We couldn't continue to destroy their habitats, hunt them to extinction, or treat them as mere resources to be exploited. We were part of a larger community of life on Earth, and we had obligations to our fellow inhabitants. James also couldn't stop thinking about the cub, that tiny ball of fur that had clung so desperately to a log in the middle of a crocodile-infested river had been given a second chance at life. Somewhere out there in the African bush, that cub was growing stronger, learning to hunt, perhaps playing with siblings, protected by parents who had done everything in their power to ensure its survival, including the unthinkable act of seeking help from a human. The experience changed James in fundamental ways. He had always loved his work, had always felt a deep connection to the wildlife he studied and protected. But this had been different. This had been personal. He found himself more committed than ever to the conservation cause, more determined to fight against the forces that threatened Africa's iconic species. Every lion, every elephant, every creature had families that loved them, that would fight for them, that would do anything to protect them. They deserved to live in a world where they didn't have to fear human encroachment, poaching, or habitat loss. Months later, James was conducting another river patrol, this time in a different section of the Ruvuma. It was early morning and the sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the landscape. As he rounded a bend in the trail, he saw them. 3 lions were drinking from the river at a safe, shallow spot far from any crocodile habitat. A magnificent male with a dark mane, a lean lioness, and a cub that was now significantly larger but still clearly young. James stopped the vehicle and watched through his binoculars, his heart beating faster with recognition. It was them. He was certain of it. The male had the same distinctive scar pattern on his muzzle. The cub, now probably 6 or 7 months old, was healthy and energetic, play attacking its mother's tail as she tried to drink. As if sensing his presence, the male lion raised his head and looked directly at the Land Rover. For a moment, James thought the big cat might ignore him and go back to drinking, but instead the lion sat down, wrapped his tail around his feet in a pose of calm dignity, and simply watched. The lioness noticed and looked over as well. Even the cub stopped playing and stared with curiosity at the vehicle. James felt tears prick at his eyes. They remembered. Or perhaps it was just his imagination. His desire to believe that the connection he'd felt that day by the river had been real and lasting. But whether they truly remembered him or not didn't matter. What mattered was that they were alive, healthy, and together. The family had survived. James raised his hand in a small wave, a gesture of greeting and farewell. The male lion stood, gave one last long look, and then turned to lead his family away into the bush. James watched until they disappeared into the tall grass. 3 sets of paw prints in the mud, the only evidence they'd been there at all. The experience by the Ruvuma River taught James something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. We are not separate from nature. We are part of it, connected to all living things through bonds we're only beginning to understand. Animals are not simple, instinct-driven machines. They think, they feel, they love their families, and sometimes in moments of desperate need, they can recognize the capacity for compassion in other species, even in humans. That lion cub would grow up to have cubs of its own someday. Those cubs would have cubs, and the bloodline would continue, all because of a split-second decision made by a conservationist who chose to act rather than simply observe. Every life matters. Every creature deserves a chance to survive and thrive. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the incredible intelligence and emotional depth of the animals we share this planet with, please subscribe to our channel and like this video. Share it with your friends and family. Let's build a community of people who care about wildlife conservation and who believe in the possibility of coexistence between humans and the natural world. Together we can make a difference. Together we can be worthy of the trust that Lioness and Lion placed in a human stranger on a desperate day by a dangerous river. The story doesn't end with the rescue. It continues every day that we choose to protect rather than destroy, to coexist rather than dominate, to listen to the earth and its creatures rather than simply exploiting them for our own benefit. James Mitchell's encounter with a lion family in crisis became a turning point in his life and in his work. He went on to establish a foundation dedicated to protecting lions and their habitats, working with local communities to reduce human-wildlife conflict and ensure that future generations of both humans and lions can thrive together. The Ruvuma River still flows through the African savanna, its waters home to crocodiles and fish, its banks frequented by lions, elephants, and countless other species. Somewhere in that vast landscape, a young lion who once clung to a log in the middle of that river is now fully grown, perhaps teaching its own cubs how to hunt, how to survive, how to live in a world that is both beautiful and dangerous. And sometimes when the wind is right and the sun hangs low on the horizon, painting everything gold, you might see a pride of lions at the river's edge. If you watch closely, you might notice that they choose their drinking spots carefully, avoiding the deeper waters where crocodiles lurk, protecting their cubs with vigilance born from hard-learned lessons. And if you're very lucky, you might witness what James witnessed, that profound connection between species, that recognition of shared purpose and mutual respect. The wild places of our planet are precious beyond measure. The creatures that inhabit them are not mere resources or attractions. They are fellow travelers on this journey through time, deserving of our respect, our protection, and sometimes, when fate demands it, our intervention. The lion family that asked for help didn't see a human. They saw a potential ally, someone who might care enough to act. May we always strive to be worthy of that recognition. Please hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and join our community of wildlife advocates. Every subscription helps support the work of conservationists like James who are out there every day protecting these magnificent animals. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed a moment of connection between species? Do you believe animals can truly communicate across the species barrier? Let's start a conversation about the incredible creatures we share this world with and how we can ensure they continue to thrive for generations to come. Thank you for watching, and remember, every creature deserves a champion.